Welcome into a special edition of Five Rounds here on the Five Reasons Sports Network. The day after, well, I was going to say the morning after, but we're 2 minutes into the afternoon. But the day after a really fun, eventful UFC 271, Israel Adesanya retaining his middleweight title against Robert Whittaker. Tai Tuivasa knocks out the UFC knockout king in the man's hometown, no less. Unbelievable. Jared Cannonier put on a show. He should be next for the middleweight title. Before we get into everything, I want to remind you guys that this show is made possible by the Quarterdeck Seafood Bar and Neighborhood Grill. Guys, it's game day. You know the game I'm talking about. There's kind of a big game happening today in the National Football League. If you don't want to invite a bunch of people over and have to prepare and clean your house, as a family man, I've come to discover how difficult these things can be. Why don't you just take your bros, your friends, your family out to the Quarterdeck Seafood Bar and Neighborhood Grill? Guys, I'm telling you, the 2-for-1 happy hour all day, every day is a great place to wet your whistle. The seafood is so fresh. The sandwiches and burgers are awesome. And yeah, they got big screens and flat screens covering every wall, and they are all going to be on the game this evening. Hopefully, a lot of you watching this checked out UFC 271 at the Quarterdeck last night, because every UFC pay-per-view is on at the Quarterdeck for zero cover charge. You pay nothing at the door. You can check out the big game there today. You can check out all of the NBA, NHL games, the Quarterdeck guys. You want to check out their menu before you go or find the location nearest to you. Visit them on the web at quarterdeckrestaurants.com. The Quarterdeck, come for the food, stay for the fun. Frank Zaffere is with me. I'm Alex Donno. And, okay, my first takeaway, Frank, from five-round decision, Adesanya over Whittaker. I was expecting 5 rounds this time. The outcome didn't surprise me whatsoever. And I think, honestly, Robert Whittaker did just about everything I said he should do. He fought so much smarter. He actually used his offensive wrestling and was able to land a handful of takedowns in the fight. Also threatened for a submission, was trying for a rear naked choke in the 4th round. He used his jab a lot more, and he didn't fight with reckless abandon. Like, he was a lot more patient. So Robert Whittaker did everything I said he had to do to make this fight close and give him a chance to win, and it still wasn't enough. It still wasn't enough. And Frank, it just goes to show you how head and shoulders better and more talented and more God-given gifts Israel Adesanya. I'm not saying hard work isn't a part of it as well, but Israel Adesanya is just too good. He's too good for Robert Whittaker. He's too good for the rest of that middleweight division.
Yeah, you called it on going the distance. So I got to give you a lot of credit for that. You also called the wrestling by Whittaker, which I was actually surprised at the effectiveness, but I have to tell you, this fight really played out the way I expected. The fight started, Robert was much more patient, as you pointed out, much more cautious, but he found out right away that even trying to stay out of range, the 7-inch reach advantage meant that he could still get touched. So staying out there and being careful meant that he was going to lose a very lopsided decision. So then he started bringing the fight to the counterpuncher. And then the points started accumulating. Takedowns or not, it played right into Israel Adesanya's hands. It's just, he's insurmountable. The only way this fight could have been managed by Robert or Whittaker in a way where maybe you don't see, or maybe eke something out, is if literally he stays outside of that guy's range the entire time and is fast enough to jump in, get a strike, and then get on his bike and run away, which would have made for a horrible fight.
Yeah.
Robert Whittaker made it a great fight. I thought it was unusual in that he lost. He looks like he's got no shot of beating him, but he also demonstrated just how talented he is. And his demonstration of that, he demonstrated just how breathtakingly good Israel Adesanya is. So it was a high mark of exhibition of what great mixed martial arts is all about.
Yeah, and on that note, you saw just how much harder Robert Whittaker had to work to still lose the fight, but lose it by a much closer margin, right? I mean, he was swimming upstream the entire fight. Everything that Israel did looked so easy and so fluid. And he also had an incredible strategy, was attacking Whittaker's lead leg with kicks very early on. You saw the counter striking. Whittaker didn't foray forward nearly as much as he did in the first fight, which got him clipped and got him countered. But the few times that he did, it was really, you could see kind of in the second round, he had some moments. And I thought Whittaker actually did win the second round. But again, like the rounds that he won, like were not dominant rounds by any stretch of the imagination. And we'll talk about the way that you and I scored the fight. But, you know, the few times that Whittaker did kind of come forward and try to close the distance quickly, he would be eating a short left hand or some of these sneaky kicks and knees that Adesanya throws. Like, he's excellent. He can catch you also in the body when you come forward at him. And, you know, Israel, just the way that he switches up stances constantly just makes him so unpredictable. You know, the last style bender, I'm sure that nickname has a lot to do with just the way that he's able to really move around like he's in the Matrix. That was a big thing that you talked about in our preview show this past Thursday night, Frank. And so let's go over how we scored it. It's one of those things where, you know, there was no question in my mind when they went to the cards that Adesanya's name was going to be said at the end of it. Still champion. At the same time, I guess I scored it 48-47, which technically only, you know, gave 3 rounds to 2 for it. Didn't feel like it was that close, Frank, but I think if you're just going by like the letter of the scorecards, and I'm a geek, so I score fights when I'm watching them. You know, I think the way I had it was, and there were no 10-8 rounds. There was nothing super dominant, super dangerous from either guy. It's why I saw some people saying they thought the fight was boring. I mean, I guess boring if you were expecting a knockout, but I thought it was an interesting chess match, right? But I went first round, I went 10-9 to Izzy. Then I thought a good bounce back round and started to use his wrestling a little bit. 10-9 round for Whittaker after the second. Then the third and fourth rounds, I both scored to Izzy. Fifth round, again, Whittaker was able to do some work, landed a takedown, had more control over the round, wasn't super eventful. So I gave Whittaker rounds 2 and 5, not enough to win the fight. I had it 48-47 Izzy, but it was like, I mean, I could understand there was one judge that scored it 49-46, and like, I could understand that because both of the rounds that I thought Whittaker edged out were just so close and not that convincing. So I had it 48-47, little to no doubt for the champ. What did you think?
Yeah, I had it 49-46. I agreed with Michael Bisping's commentary during the course of the fight where he was saying, you know, there was just some fireworks there from Robert Whittaker, or he just landed a takedown, but the cumulative performance of the round, you might be losing perspective, was essentially what he's saying. That Izzy's still winning these rounds, and I felt that way going through, that there was no doubt. I got to give a lot of credit to Adesanya's cerebral discipline, staying with a game plan. You know, it had to be tempting when Whittaker finally decided, because he was getting frustrated, to just make it a firefight at times. It had to be difficult for Izzy not to engage in a firefight, but he stayed on point. He stayed on game plan. That speaks volumes to his evolution as a fighter. I mean, he's not just so good athletically. He's not just so naturally gifted, but he's also a really smart fighter.
Yeah, he really is.
Situation. It reminds me, I'm sorry to cut you off, but
No,
it really reminds me of Usman Covington in the welterweight division. I mean,
but George St. Pierre back in the day, he got a lot smarter at a certain point in his career.
Well, what I meant was that you just got this guy, Kamaru Usman, who's just so good, but the number one contender in any other universe is the reigning dominant champion. And you have this situation in the middleweight division where Robert Whittaker, he's everything. I mean, he's so damn good and improving all the time. But unfortunately, the guy with the belt is next level good, you know,
right.
You know, and in 15 years good.
Yeah, so Adesanya gets his hand raised, rightfully so. I feel for Robert Whittaker because I don't know how much just against that opponent, and he's just at a physical disadvantage, Frank. I mean, we talked before the fight about how I really thought Whittaker, as he did, would need to emphasize his wrestling a lot more. He did land 4 successful takedowns in 10 tries, which against Izzy is really good because his takedown defense at 185 is epically good. You know, the one time his takedown defense got exploited was at 205 against a guy who's big enough to be a heavyweight in Jan Blachowicz. And that was why, like, you know, we emphasize Whittaker is going to have some success, takedowns and control. The takedowns were there.
That's what he didn't have, Alex, right?
Control.
He had takedowns. He didn't have the control.
Exactly. Yeah, he didn't have the control. And it's easy to see why, because Jan Blachowicz is so big and strong that when he beat Adesanya at 205, he was taking down Adesanya in the middle of the octagon, and he was holding him there. And just Whittaker is not big enough to do that. And his lack of size, and he's a former welterweight in Robert Whittaker, and he's got welterweight size. He's one of those guys that benefited from putting on some weight, I think, because certain guys just fight better when they're not drained. Like certain guys just fight better when they're not draining themselves for weight cuts. I think he's one of those guys. But then the problem is you go up against somebody like Izzy, who's on, the longer end of the middleweight division. I'm not going to say that big because he wouldn't be a large light heavyweight, but he's a longer, rangier guy. It just creates difficult stylistic challenges for Whittaker. So I almost feel like there's really nothing Robert Whittaker can do to get good enough to beat Adesanya. I thought the one thing, and Frank, I think it was DC that pointed this out on the broadcast, and he's the wrestling guru, of course. And you talked about control, right? The handful of times that Whittaker was able to find successful takedowns and Izzy would pop back up pretty quickly, Whittaker was way too willing to separate and get back in range, right? If you have a takedown that you land, the opponent pops up, you keep smothering them, right? And it takes a lot of cardio and a lot of confidence to do that. And maybe Whittaker just doesn't have that much confidence as a wrestler. But when you're chaining together takedowns and a guy pops back up to the feet, you don't let them breathe. You take them down again, or at least work for it. And Whittaker wasn't doing that. It's like every time Adesanya was able to force his way back up, Whittaker was perfectly fine to separate and then try to go through the entire process again. And that wasn't going to work against a guy that good in space.
In my opinion, I did notice that. That's a great point by you. And my opinion is that happens. And I'm thinking distantly in the many years since I wrestled, but that happens. You give up on it when your opponent feels stronger than you.
Okay.
Really stronger than you, because you put a lot of effort to get the takedown. And when they push you off and stand up that easily, you're like, all right, I just got to reset on this. Because, going through the effort of dragging him down again, only to get shoved off again. I mean, you're just running out of gas. Yeah. So that actually leads me to something I really wanted to ask you.
Sure.
Today, which is that what does Robert Whittaker do? Because I think of Izzy as kind of a skinny guy, maybe even mildly undersized, seemingly in the division, but much stronger than Robert Whittaker. Does Robert Whittaker, as a former welterweight, does he think about going back? Because, if you can't take Izzy down and hold him down for a minute, not for a second, Alex, could he hold him down? And it's not like Izzy's an accomplished wrestler. He's just stronger. He was just able to stand up, shove him off, and get the fight back to where he wanted it to be. I was really impressed with Izzy's strength, and I was wondering where Robert Whittaker goes.
I want to address that in a second. First, I just want to shout out everybody who's in the live chat with us. I see my guy Chris at the Fins Tailgate. I was a guest on his show yesterday talking mostly Dolphins, but a little bit of Canes and Heat. He does an awesome job, guys. Make sure you subscribe to his channel, the Fins Tailgate, Chris. And he's got like a whole crew. He's got a whole network now. They do an awesome job. Joseph Rodriguez, thank you so much. Our guy, Jonathan Ramakan. And by the way, Johnny did a post-fight, the full post-fight wrap-up right after the pay-per-view last night. Make sure you guys check out the replay to that. Also available on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. And then, of course, check out also our preview episode on 5 Rounds on Thursday night. He joined us for that as well. So make sure you're supporting at 3-Piece Combo on Twitter and the work that he does. And, support us as well. Everybody, smash that freaking like button. Yeah, it's going to be, Frank, it's going to be a difficult soul-searching period, I think, for Robert Whittaker. Obviously he can hang around the middleweight division for a while, cash some checks, right? Fight some decent contenders. But the problem is, man, when you have 2 losses to the current champion, and the first of those you were demolished, second of those you were competitive, but it was clear, like there was nothing controversial about it. It was a clear L, right? You've got to kind of realize if you hang around at 185, it's either going to be a really, really long time before you get another crack, or you've got to hope Izzy loses or leaves the division and the belt is around somebody else's waist. But that's out of your control. And if Israel Adesanya decides he wants to hang around the middleweight division for the foreseeable future, I think he's going to keep successfully defending that belt. And if you're Robert Whittaker at 185, you're in purgatory. So yeah, I know that he much prefers middleweight than welterweight, and he's had much more success at middleweight than welterweight. But I think you've got to think about going back down. Like, I really think you have to think about going back down, because that's how you can kind of start the clock over, right? I mean, former really good middleweight champion drops down to 170. You know, he may only be, and it's a deep division 170, but still, he's got the cachet of being a former belt holder at a different weight class. He may just be a victory or two away from getting a welterweight title shot. Whereas if he stays at middleweight, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 victories away from getting another middleweight title shot. So I think you strongly have to think about that. And obviously, a lot of this is going to depend on what Izzy decides to do next, right? But if I'm Whittaker and I'm assuming this guy's going to be the middleweight champion for several more years, there's not really much of a future here for me.
No, and I just love the idea of him getting a fight, and I really think it would be one fight, and then he gets Kamaru Usman, and Kamaru Usman has fallen in love, somewhat justifiably so, with his enhanced and improved striking, and I'd like to see him test that against somebody like Robert Whittaker. I think that would be a great fight, and I think we could see a change of champions. I bring it up only also because I think the thing that puts Kamaru Usman most in peril is the idea of Robert rejoining that division.
Yeah.
He's a much more complete fighter now. And, Izzy's just Izzy, man. I mean, and then to your point, he's not leaving 185. He's too small to be at 205. He proved that. How long would he have to be out? His body type just isn't going to put on that kind of weight. So he's staying there.
Well, I don't know. The thing about, well, okay, before we talk about what's next for Izzy, let's real quick go over, the fight that was right in the middle of the main card, because I think this is very important for Israel Adesanya's future. Jared Cannonier looked fantastic. He ends up KOing Derek Brunson with elbows, just hellacious. He'd actually, early in the second round, he had landed a right hook. Derek Brunson was not the same after that. And then a few minutes later is when the victory came, the stoppage came. And like, not only did the referee step in when he was taking those hellacious elbows, but Brunson's corner even threw in the towel. Like he was getting absolutely wrecked.
What's the ref waiting for, Alex? Like, I mean, didn't you think that was late? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, you. I did. No, I did think it was late. And actually, and very good on Brunson's corner for actually looking out for there, because you always hear some people say they're like, oh, only wuss corners, are you throwing in a towel for? It's like, no, they're there to protect the fighter. He was like 2 elbows away from being in a freaking coma. Like, no, kudos to them for throwing in the towel. And it wasn't just like, we knew Jared Cannonier, who by the way is a former heavyweight. And he's been able to, even moving down to 185, he's been able to retain a lot of that power, which is key, because you don't always take the power with you when you drop down multiple weight classes the way that he did. You saw the power on full display, but it's not just the power. He continues to get better as an overall fighter. His footwork was fantastic. And Derek Brunson is a tough SOB, man. Like that's honestly, that is a great litmus test for where you are. I mean, Brunson came into that fight the 4th ranked guy in the middleweight division. Had Brunson won the fight, may have punched his ticket, even though he's already lost to Izzy. Had Brunson won the fight, could very well have kind of punched his ticket to, being back at the top of that middleweight carousel. So it's probably better for all of us that Jared Cannonier, who hasn't got that crack, wins this fight. To me, it's a no-brainer. Like, this is the fight you have to do next. And honestly, Frank, I look at, the middleweight rankings as far as relevant players in that division. Let me just enlarge middleweight so you guys don't have to see the full picture there. Like, you look at the relevant players in that division right now, outside of Jared Cannonier and, Sean Strickland is on the way up in that division. Really, there's not really a whole lot of relevant challenges there for Adesanya, because he's basically cleaned that division out already. So yeah, we agree it's got to be Cannonier next, right?
Yeah, it's funny. Just quickly, it's funny looking at that list that Izzy's toughest fight was the number 10th ranked guy, Kelvin Gastelum. It's like everybody should train with Kelvin in terms of figuring out how to push Adesanya. But yeah, Cannonier is clearly the guy. I didn't know if maybe the UFC would want Cannonier to face Strickland, but probably better to stack up challengers because
Yeah.
running out of them pretty quickly. Cannonier, though, cannot wait for this fight with Adesanya. I cannot wait. Cannonier is terrifying to me. There's a level of unbridled violence to his game that is really intimidating, and he's absolutely going to bring it. Probably ends quickly, right, with the counter-striking matrix-like
Yes.
skill of Adesanya. But man, if he connects with anything, could be the longest night of Adesanya's life.
Yeah, and Adesanya's recent fights have not been all that violent. Like it's just been class, right? And I think that's a combination of the types of opponents you face, also the fact that once you become the champion, I think there's more pressure to fight conservatively because you're no longer the hunter, you're the hunted, right? I think that makes sense to me. It's like when George St. Pierre was on his way up, he was finishing a lot of fights. And then when he became champion, it was mostly decisions. He was fighting a lot more careful, a lot more conservative. He was fighting the points game. You could argue maybe Izzy has been doing that a little bit, fighting more of the points game, taking fewer risks, but he's also been taking on opponents who don't really put him in a position to end fights violently because he's primarily a counter striker. So I agree with what you said. I agree with what our guy Jonathan Ramlakan says in that comment. This would probably be the fight because Israel clearly better than Jared Cannonier. I love watching Jared Cannonier fight, and I think he can be a threat to beat anyone in that division, but it's Israel Adesanya's fight to lose. And that sort of an encounter, I think, would force Izzy to have to be a lot more decisive because Cannonier's going to throw a lot more at him and open himself up to be counterpunched and probably taken out of the fight, second or third round knockout, something like that.
Yeah, I agree with Jonathan. I mean, like the counterpunching skill of Adesanya. I mean, what Cannonier is going to do is going to play right into that. I'm just saying that Cannonier is so big and strong that if he gets to him, he's able to eat a couple of those strikes and gets to him. I mean, the story in that fight could change very quickly. And the level of intensity in terms of wanting to bring violence to his opponent is really something. Cannonier's a monster. He's a scary dude, man.
He absolutely is. Okay, so let me ask you. I mean, we mentioned that there's kind of two potential contenders in the works. Obviously, Cannonier should be the next guy. Line him up. Somebody like Sean Strickland, a little bit more of a wild card because he would have to fight again. Who knows what happens when he goes up against somebody else in the upper echelon of the division. So I'm kind of looking at this right now, Frank, with the perspective of Izzy has beaten the majority of the contenders at 185. Some of them he's beaten twice already. I mean, he's got his second win over Whittaker, had his second win against Marvin Vettori recently. So he's come very close to cleaning out that division. If he beats Jared Cannonier at some point within the next year, and I think it absolutely will be in the next year because Adesanya actually likes to stay active. Like sometimes champions are like, you know what? I'm chill. I'm just going to fight once a year. Like this guy wants to fight 3 times a year, which means they'll probably have him fight about twice a year because the UFC doesn't necessarily want to push their champs out there that often. But yeah, I think it's definitely going to be within the next year. So if he beats Jared Cannonier, what would you like to see Izzy do after that? Then would you start to say, you know what? Depending on who the light heavyweight champion is, and Jan Blachowicz no longer holds that belt. And that was one of the worst stylistic matchups for him, given the size and the wrestling, right? I don't necessarily expect our guy Glover Teixeira to still be holding the title, but that would be a matchup I think Israel could win. If my guy Yuri Prochazka becomes the champ, similar enough styles. Obviously, Prochazka being a bigger, longer guy would make it complicated, but I think that to me is a better stylistic matchup for Izzy than a Jan Blachowicz, who's no longer the champ. So I don't think I've closed the door. If I'm Adesanya, I'm being very tactical about this. I'm going to wait and see who the champion is at that time. But I think he should consider giving another try to 205, assuming they'd be willing to give him another immediate title shot there. Because I think some of the guys near the top of that division, I think he can beat.
If it was a few years ago, I would agree with you. But the 205-pound division's become the who cares division of the UFC. So in terms of like marketable matchups, I'd rather see him face some of the more interesting people that lurk in his division a second time than go up and face people that nobody's ever heard of in the 205-pound division, which is currently being ruled by a guy from some suburb in where is he, in Connecticut somewhere?
Danbury.
Yeah, middle-aged man about my age in Danbury, Connecticut. Like, that's where we're at with the 205 division. I also don't think he has the body for it. So I think he has to step away, kind of John Jones it with heavyweight. I think he have to change dramatically. I think if I'm managing Adesanya, I'm telling him, look, you have the opportunity to make everybody forget about Anderson Silva, as hard as that is to believe. So just keep doing that. That's his ticket to superstardom. He's too big to go to welter. He's too small to go to 205. Unless they add divisions, which I know comes up in conversation from time to time, and try to make it every 10 pounds all the way up.
I could see them doing that, by the way.
Then I could see him doing a 195, belt too. But what would they call that? Like the cruiserweight, or I don't know.
Like, I don't know, like junior heavyweight, or maybe cruiserweight, or like super light heavyweight. They'll come up with some stupid ass name for it, I'm sure.
So if they do something like that, then fine. But really, I'd like to see him where he's at. And what's up with Mr. Rockhold? Is he coming back to middleweight?
We talked about that a couple months ago. I haven't thought about it since then, but yes, I think he is making the comeback.
So Luke Rockhold, despite his chin issues that have evidenced themselves over the last couple of years, he was dealing with a lot of injury too. There's a multifaceted super talent that would be a fun fight. Like, wouldn't you rather see Adesanya fight Luke Rockhold, no matter what he's ranked in the middleweight division, than see him fight anybody at 205 right now? What do you want to see?
I don't know, man. To me, and I used to be a big Luke Rockhold fan, but I think he got to the point where he was just so washed, and then the chin just went. Like, not always, because Andre Arlovsky has found a way to reinvent himself, but like usually once the chin goes, you can't come back from that. And I don't know, like Rockhold, the last few times I've seen him, just looks like a shell of his former self. That doesn't really move the needle for me, I'm being honest.
Okay, well, I'm just taking flyers at stuff.
Yeah,
but I'm just saying, I feel like there's names at 185, there's depth, there's interest, and I feel like the light heavyweight division has a ways to go before we get
Estefan likes the idea.
Yeah, good. Somebody agrees with me. I knew there was somebody.
What do you like Estefan's idea? There's a lot of weight here. Jorge Masvidal. I mean, to me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well,
no, I'm
Masvidal's a lightweight who's blowing up to fight at welterweight.
Yeah.
So like what? But he's not fighting, is he? Is that what we're talking about?
What about Nick Diaz?
Well, Nick Diaz, I mean, unfortunately for Nick Diaz, it's just another terrible mark on a declining record. I mean, he's moving in slow motion, Alex. You know that.
I think Diaz wins that fight against Adesanya. I think Adesanya would probably underestimate him. I think he would
take the blue pill, bro.
By the way, if anyone is watching us for the first time and you think, who is this dumbass that thinks Nick Diaz would have a chance against Adesanya? I throw all logic out the window when I'm talking about the Diaz brothers. I am the biggest Diaz brothers fanboy, especially Nick. Nick, number one, Nate, number two, and then my third favorite fighter is way below either of those guys. So I'm all over that. All right, let's talk about the co-main event. Delivered. I mean, we knew it would. Like, we knew no matter who won, we knew Tai Tuivasa against Derrick Lewis in Derrick Lewis's hometown. We knew that fight would deliver. Frank, do you think Derrick Lewis, who had already said it, what was it? Was it the Cyril Gane fight was also in Houston? Like, he lost to Cyril Gane in his hometown, and he said it after that. He never wanted to fight in Houston again, right? Because, he doesn't like, he didn't like 5-round fights. This one was not a 5-round fight. But, I think a lot of pressure, and he's got like 30 family members who show up to the fights and the hometown thing. He never wanted to fight in Houston again. They convinced him to fight in his hometown for a second time, and he gets KO'd by the shoey man, Tai Tuivasa. So do you think this is the last time? Do you think Derrick Lewis is now going to say, never a freaking again will I fight in Houston?
Well, probably, but it would be unfortunate if that's what he's blaming it on. I mean, look, it happened the way I expected it to happen for a couple of reasons. The biggest one being he underestimated Tuivasa, and he thought he could come after him, push him around, and and knock him out. And he underestimated the strength, the agility, the ability to take punishment, and the power that these guys from that part of the world have, man. I mean, he is Mark Hunt times 10. I mean, he's really, really effing tough. And look, I thought Derrick Lewis might bring the noise, thinking he's really just an emphatic win away from getting another shot at Ngannou, and he paid for it. I thought it would happen at the end of the first round, but
same here. And it did. I had kind of talked about betting the under round and a half, but it would have gone over. So thank God I didn't. And even though, so we go back to our show last Thursday when we were previewing the event, I should say, you were more bullish on Tuivasa than I was in the breakdown. I did end up putting my money on Tuivasa.
All right, good.
I couldn't resist the plus money I was getting on that. So honestly, usually I get it right in the breakdown, and then I get it wrong when I bet a different way. This time I got it wrong in the breakdown, and I actually got it right with my wallet, and I actually prefer this outcome because I'm like, $63 richer having made the proper bet on this one. So, and it was, by the way, if you guys haven't seen the finish, we can't, I wish we could air the clip, but Dana White's lawyers will be all over us for copyright. Just a sick standing elbow, and had landed heavy punches before that, but a sick standing elbow that caused Derrick Lewis to be separated from his senses and do the face plant right into the octagon there at the Toyota Center in Houston, Texas. It was unfreaking believable. And Frank, is it time people start actually taking Tai Tuivasa seriously as a heavyweight contender and not just a sideshow? Because I'm a huge fan of Tuivasa because I have a soft spot for that part of the world. Mark Hunt is one of my top favorite fighters of all time, like one of my top 5, below the Diaz brothers, of course, but like Mark Hunt is right in that mix for me for some of the tops. And obviously Tuivasa, just the energy, the Samoan heritage, the sick, deceptive knockout power, not being in the best shape, right, from the waist down. He reminds me a lot of Mark Hunt. So I've been a big Tai Tuivasa fan, but I hear the way people talk about, oh, he's just a brawler, he's just a fun fighter, the same way people used to talk about Derrick Lewis. But Derrick Lewis, a couple title fights later and big wins later, people take Derrick Lewis seriously in the UFC heavyweight division. They didn't used to, they do now. So is it time for people to take Tai Tuivasa seriously in the heavyweight landscape?
100% yes, but let me qualify that. Ciryl Gane, Francis Ngannou, they have no trouble defeating this guy. For reasons that I cannot understand, Derrick Lewis's game plan could not have been worse. And Jermaine King pointed it out. I agree. What's with the flipping wrestling? What was he trying to accomplish there? Well, Derrick Lewis his whole game is knocking you out.
He was afraid of getting knocked out.
He gassed himself, and I agree with him. I could see him getting gassed.
Yeah, I could see it too.
He's being held against the cage, and he's eating short punches and elbows. It was a really, really weird moment. And you mentioned a few minutes ago, maybe he just short circuits in his hometown. I don't understand it, but it couldn't have been a worse game plan. And I also think he underestimated. I already said it, but I also think he underestimated Tuivasa. But Tuivasa, he's a great fighter. He's underestimated. We should appreciate him, but don't get delusional. He's not going to be the number one contender. He's not beating Ciryl Gane. That's not happening. So
no, he's not. All right, I just got 2 straight calls from my wife on the bat phone, so there must be something going on. We'll wrap up this stream in a couple of minutes. And what would you like to see next for Tai Tuivasa? By the way, is he? I don't know. He might be. How about Tai Tuivasa versus John Jones? How about we welcome Johnny into the heavyweight division with that one? That would be an interesting clash of styles.
I don't think John Jones. I sort of added that. I don't think John Jones will have any problem with him either. I think the reach. I think the range is going to present problems for the Samoan. But he is fun to watch, man. And he did not 1 but 2 shoeys on the way out. But
yes,
for us, no cuppies.
No cuppy. I want to send a huge thanks to everybody, of course, and guys, make sure you support our guy Jonathan Ramlakan as well on the 5 Reasons Sports Network and watch his great post-fight recap from last night. Did you go on that, Frank? I know Jonathan is such a nice guy. I've done a post-fight with him before, but he knows not to invite me on unless it's one of those early cards, because I can't do like the 2-3 in the morning thing anymore. In fact,
I was up, man. I was waiting for the call up because Robert, he's big leagues, man. So like if I get the call up, I want to make sure I get it. So I'd given him my cell, but he must have had a bigger star.
Yeah, and actually, I'm so washed. I will fully admit, I went to bed after the Tuivasa win, and then I woke up this morning because I ordered the pay-per-view so you can access the replay whenever. So I woke up this morning and then I watched the main event. So that's how I couldn't. I couldn't even sit. What time? Like Frank, you were up. Like what time did the fight end?
It was early. It was over 12:30. A little after 12:30.
Early.
Over. Well, no, I mean, you know how these things can go.
Yeah, I know.
They want that main event starting at 1 a.m.,
Yeah.
So,
I was in bed by like 11:45 last
finishes in the fight card, as you know, that expedited things, certainly. And we didn't get to mention, but I want to send a little shout out to Andre Arlovsky. I love the old guys still making it happen.
And that is a guy who has been able to reinvent himself despite the fact that he lost his chin. Like, do you remember there was and this was like 10 years ago, I thought this guy was washed. Like when he was in Strike Force, like 2011, he was getting knocked out by people like Haritonov. And just like as soon as this guy got touched, you remember like when Fedor knocked him out with one punch in Affliction. It's like, this dude's finished. He's found a way to protect his chin. Alistair Overeem did the same thing. Like you thought like 5-6 years ago, he was completely done, had no chin. He was able to extend the career. So I guess there is hope. Maybe there is hope for Luke Rockhold that he may not be completely finished, but huge. Oh, by the way, so Estefan was not saying Masvidal versus Stylebender. He said, how about moving up in weight? Michael Venom Page style bender. MVP, that's yes. He is one of the most entertaining fighters to watch in the entire world. He's like just I'm not saying he's better because Stylebender is better, but MVP striking, it's like Stylebender on steroids. Like that guy is extremely fun to watch. Let me throw out some shout outs here before we wrap it up. Estefan, thank you so much. Noeline Salima, thank you so much for tuning in. Jermaine King, who I think is based on his avatar. I think that's my dude, Cookie Monster, who used to call us a lot on the terrestrial radio show. I think that's the same guy. It's either the same guy or it's somebody else who loves Cookie Monster. Joseph Rodriguez, thank you so much for tuning in and watching us today. And F20 Money, talking about the Miami Heat, but why the hell not? The Heat are awesome. And we appreciate everyone for tuning in. We will talk to you again. And the reason why, by the way, we wanted to do a show on Sunday, not only is it, it's fun to recap a pay-per-view the day after, but I'm going to be out of town, so we're not doing the usual Thursday show this week. So we wanted to get one in. We wanted to give the people their money's worth. Oh, wait, they don't pay for this show. Well, still, we wanted to give the people their money's worth. They wanted to give the people something to watch. And if you do want to support the show is free. But if you do want to support us, support the Quarterdeck Seafood Bar and Neighborhood Grill. Get out there today, guys. There's an important sporting event happening. If you want to watch that at the Quarterdeck, it's going to be on all the TVs, big screens, high definition. 2-for-1 happy hour, man. All day, every day. I do some damage on those 2-for-1 margaritas at the Quarterdeck. The seafood is so fresh. I love to build my own poke bowl. Buffalo shrimp is the best appetizer on the planet, and that's the version that they have at the Quarterdeck because it's so crispy, it's so spicy, it's so delicious. The sandwiches and burgers are fantastic. The beer is always cold. Even if you missed UFC 271 out there last night, if you watched it at home, watch the next pay-per-view, 272 and beyond at the Quarterdeck. Guys, they have it for zero cover charge. You pay nothing at the door to watch a UFC pay-per-view. Find the location nearest to you and peep their menu at quarterdeckrestaurants.com. The Quarterdeck, come for the food, stay for the fun.
Enjoy Jamaica, my friend.
Thank you, man. I'm gonna be eating a lot of jerk chicken, relaxing on the beach. Although I can never really relax. Like I'm gonna be out there, like my wife's gonna try and relax on the beach. I'm gonna be checking like crypto quotes and like UFC and international soccer news. Like I do not know how to relax, but I'm gonna give it the old college try this week.
Yeah, please do. You need it. You both need it. So
I don't think she might need it. I don't need it. I'm good. Frank Zaffere, enjoy the rest of your weekend, my friend. We'll talk again in a couple weeks. Peace. And let me real quick before you go, let me plug. In fact, the next time I see Frank, it's going to be for training session number 1. We're going to have his first training session with head coach Dean Thomas. Frank is actually putting his how old are you now?
51.
He is putting his 51-year-old body through an MMA training camp. Dean freaking Thomas is going to be his head coach. JP Reese is going to be his wrestling coach. He's going to start training Tuesday, the 22nd of February. I'm going to be out there filming it, documenting it, and we're actually going to get a fight for Frank by the end of that training camp. So make sure you follow, because any videos we take will be posted to the YouTube channel, 5 Reasons Sports on YouTube. We'll talk to you guys next time on another episode of 5 Rounds on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. See ya.